Muted.
So I won't be showing you very much of that today, but historically we only had the capability to do the SAPs and the PeopleSofts and the Salesforces of this world, and in recent years we've added this ability to be able to work with other packages as well. So we can reverse engineer the metadata from those environments. I'm not really going to talk too much about the substance of that middle box because I'm going to actually show you the product, but there are features within the product to take that metadata and do what we call scoping, and that is bringing down the very large amounts of tables and attributes and relationships into more manageable groups, and that's really what the product is all about, and I hope I'm going to be able to show you that effectively in just a few minutes. Once you've done that, once you've done your analysis work and you perhaps come up with a set of tables and relationships that are relevant to whatever the project is that you're trying to do, we can then export that into things like ERw. And over on the right are the typical scenarios where we see that being used. And in global terms, you can think of that as any information management project. If you're trying to do any of those kind of projects on the right, so governance, BI, enterprise architecture, master data management, any of those kind of things which are about data, but that data needs to come to from one of the packages on the left, that's really where Safyr gets used, and that's really where it has the most value, is in helping you to address that requirement where you have one or more of these packages. So just to give you some idea about how big these packages are, these are very round figures, but a typical SAP ERP system is, believe it or not, in excess of 90,000 base tables. Something like Salesforce is relatively small. You know, you're probably going to be less than 1,000 tables. The Oracle applications vary in size. Siebel and JD Edwards will be typically around the 4,000 table mark, and PeopleSoft and Oracle E-Business Suite around the 20,000 table mark. So even if you've got something like Siebel, which is 4,000 tables, that might sound small compared with 90,000 tables, but trying to identify from that a set of tables and attributes and relationships which are relevant to whatever you're trying to do is not easy. It's not simple. And if you've got 90,000 tables and 500,000 attributes like you have in an SAP system, it's very difficult without having specialist knowledge. Obviously, you could go to the implementation team or the management team of the package, and you could ask them, where do I find customer master in my ERP system? And what Safyr does, Safyr gives you the ability to answer those kind of questions yourself. So there are three quite significant challenges when it comes to trying to do one of those kind of projects, one of those information management projects with these large packages. Number one, which you've already just touched on, is they are big. Obviously they're big typically in the amount of actual data that they're storing, but when I'm saying big, I mean in metadata terms. You know, as I said, SAP is by far the biggest, 90,000 tables, 500,000 attributes, something like the same number of relationships. But even some of the smaller ones, still very large, very difficult to understand in terms of the sheer volume of metadata that you've got to cope with. The second point is cryptic. Now this varies a lot, but a lot of these packages have either very abbreviated or sometimes, in the case particularly of SAP and J.D. Edwards, almost unintelligible table and column names. It's very hard, even if you can work out which of the thousands of tables is perhaps the one or ones you're interested in, it's very hard to work out what do those tables really mean, what do the columns store, very, very difficult. And none of these packages use primary and foreign keys. They don't store primary and foreign keys in the database. The relationship definitions are in the application layer, the package layer, which is the third area, is that they are proprietary. So a tool like ERw will allow you to reverse engineer a database. You could point ERw at something like Oracle or SQL Server or DB2, and you can reverse engineer a database from the system catalog. Now you could do that with something like with SAP or PeopleSoft, but you're going to get no relationship information, no primary keys, and often the resulting table and column names will not be very easy to understand. And that's because each of these packages has some kind of its own data dictionary. It's a proprietary data dictionary where it stores a logical view, if you like, of the underlying data structure. And that's the place that we go to get the metadata. So whereas ERw will reverse engineer a database from the system catalog, we're doing something functionally very similar, but we're doing that by looking into the proprietary data dictionary layer of each of these packages. So what I want to do now is actually switch into showing you the product, and I'm hoping I can then bring out some of these points that we talked about. And what we're going to do, we're going to actually look at a J.D. Edwards system to start off with. And this is the main interface for Safyr. And it's divided up into these clickable tiles, which cover most of the features that you want to do on a day-to-day basis. There are also an icon bar and a toolbar which covers the same features plus some other ones, but most of the things that you want to do on a day-to-day basis are covered by these tiles. And that first one is the ability to connect to the source system and extract the metadata. So we're always in a customer environment. If a customer buys the product, the customer is extracting their own metadata. And that includes, John mentioned earlier on, it includes any of the customizations that have been done at the customer site. So if you've added tables, attributes, relationships to the standard set delivered by the manufacturer, we get all that stuff as well. We're never delivering a sort of reference model, if you like, of SAP or PeopleSoft or Salesforce, whatever it might be. It's always you're getting a view onto your own system. So you go through this reverse engineering exercise to pull the metadata back, and then these tools in the middle here, what we call the scoping tools, we use those to start to subset the tables into more manageable groups. So just before I actually do that, let's switch over and we'll look at an ERw model. And this is an ERw model of just 500 tables from a J.D. Edwards system. And for those of you who are familiar with ERw, I'm sure you'll recognize the interface here. And you can see over on the left there are, a whole bunch of entity names, and they're all quite understandable by virtue of what we pull out of J.D. Edwards with Safyr. But I think you'd all agree that that's too big a model. It's only 500 of the 4,000 odd tables in the J.D. Edwards system, but it's too big. Certainly too big for me. I would really struggle to understand a model of that sort of size and complexity. And this is part of the problem about it being very large, the amount of metadata. It's not just the case of being able to work out the relevant descriptive names for tables and columns and their relationships. Even if you can do that, you don't want to make an ERw model of 4,000 tables, or in the case of SAP, 90,000 tables. And this is partly why I was mentioning earlier on, that Safyr is not just a scanner for these packages. Part of the benefit of using the product, part of the approach of using the product is to allow you to quickly reduce that set of tables into more manageable groups. So I would never normally create a model of this size. I've just deliberately made this to show you the problems of dealing with models of such complexity. So let's go back to the Safyr environment, and we can now start to explore the set of tables that we've reverse engineered from J.D. Edwards. So here's a list of all the tables that we pull out of the J.D. Edwards system. I'm going to major on J.D. Edwards today, but if we have time, I will touch on some of the other packages as well. And most of the features that I'm going to show you today are equally applicable to those other packages. So obviously the content will be different, but the way that you explore is exactly the same, regardless if it's J.D. Edwards, SAP, Salesforce, whatever package it might be. So as I said, this is a list of all the tables that we've reverse engineered from the system. If you look to the bottom there, it says there are 4,825. So there's 4,825 tables in this system. And in that first column is the technical name. What will become a physical name when we make it into an ERw model. And without Safyr, you'd only see those names if you looked in the system catalog of the database. And I think J.D. Edwards in some ways is the worst culprit in terms of the naming. You know, extremely difficult to work out. If you only had that table name, what's the purpose of that table? What sort of information does it store? And obviously the second column is much better. You can see there this descriptive name which tells us what that table's about, and that's only available from the data dictionary of J.D. Edwards. It's not in the system catalog. And then we've got some other stuff over on the right which I'll talk about in just a second. And of course what we could do, we could say, well, we'll pull all 4,825 tables into ERw, and we get a kind of spaghetti diagram like the one I just showed you in ERw. So we don't really want to do that. Whatever it is we're trying to do, if it's master data management, if it's governance, if it's building some sort of model of a warehouse, we want to focus down on the set of tables which are relevant to what we're trying to do. So this is where the search criteria along the top come in. So let's take something really simple. Let's look for sales order. We'll do a wildcard search on the descriptive name of each table, and we'll look for sales order. And that gives us now 52. We've got 52 tables that have got sales order somewhere in the description. And if you look over to the right, you can see there's a row count. So when we pull the data definitions out of the source system, we also extract a row count so we can see how much data is in each table. So one of the things I might think about doing is to say, well, I only want to look at tables that have actually got data in them. You know, if they haven't got any data, it's probably not relevant to what I'm trying to do. And as you can see, that's brought it down into a more manageable 22 tables now, which have got sales order somewhere in their description. And there are some quite promising looking table names. The sales order header file, for instance, there, and the sales order detail file. Looks like a sort of parent-child kind of relationship. And if you look at these columns here, these show us the number of related tables. So the sales order header, for example, has got 66 child tables, and it's got 11 parent tables. So it receives foreign keys from 11 tables, and it gives its primary key as a foreign key to 66 other tables. So if we drill into that table now, again we can see the technical name for each attribute, the columns if you like. So if you looked in the database system catalog, these are the rather unfriendly names you'd see for the columns. The more helpful descriptive name is here, so you can see order number, order type, order company, etc. You'll also see a quite helpful attribute definition down here, which again is being pulled from the J.D. Edwards environment. We get this definition of each attribute. So as I click on each attribute, I'm going to get some help there in the bottom right corner to tell me what that attribute's all about. So let's go back to the list of tables, and what I could also do now is I could pull this dialog up and I'll see more about the related tables. So the 11 parent tables are in the top of this dialog, and the 66 child tables are in the bottom. And again, what I could do, see the little checkbox here, only with data, I can filter out any of those tables that don't have data in them. And that's quite a big help in this case. I can see that the 66 child-related tables, only 18 of them have actually got data in them. And 8 of the parent tables have got data in them. So if whatever my project was something to do with sales order, I'd already start to be thinking, well, this is kind of giving me some of the sorts of results that I'd expect. These look quite promising, some of these tables, as potential candidates for my project. And therefore what I'd like to do, I'd like to start recording this. I'd like to kind of remember these tables, and to do that we have the concept of a subject area. And a subject area is a grouping of tables. It's a very similar concept to the ERw subject area. And just for the purposes of this, I'm going to reuse an existing subject area. I've got one here called demo. And a subject area, it's simply a grouping, any arbitrary grouping of tables that you want to make. You can see I've got a whole bunch of existing ones here, accounts payable, accounts receivable, etc. I'm going to use this one, demo, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the sales order header file and I'm going to put that into my subject area. And then I'm going to have a look at these related tables, and I'm going to actually select all those parent tables, the things which give a foreign key to the sales order. I'm going to select all 8 and I'm going to add those to the subject area. And I could do the same thing for the child tables. I could take all 18 and actually just going to take the sales order detail from here and put it in there. So I've made my own little Venn diagram, if you like. I've made my own grouping of tables. So let's take that group now, and what I could do now is I could use that as the vehicle to export into an ERw model. So I could take one or more subject areas, and I'll make an ERw model from this. I'm going to make an ERw 9 model, and I'm going to call it sales order, and then it uses the ERw API to generate a model. Fully populated model. You can see it's done it quite quickly. So there's 10 entities in this model, just under 1,000 attributes, a bunch of relationships. So we'll switch over into ERw, and rather than looking at that that model with the 500 tables in it, we'll open up this one, which is the sales order, and we'll use one of ERw's nice layout features, and then we'll perhaps do a zoom. And you can see how big in terms of attributes some of these tables are from that view. So I'm going to switch this down now to just showing the model at primary and foreign primary key level, and we'll do another layout. So we're just looking at the keys now on this model, and you can already see it's not a bad model. You can see there's the sales order header. We can see a relationship across to the sales order detail, as you would expect. Nice, meaningful entity and attribute names. And as I always think about any modeling tool, you can build a model very quickly, and then you can spend the rest of the week making it look nice, which of course we're not going to do because we haven't really got the time. And if we switch into the physical model, it gives you a sort of an idea of what it would be like without Safyr. And it's very difficult to understand what the purpose of these tables are when you've got table and column names like that, and without Safyr you wouldn't even have the relationships. There is no primary and foreign keys in the database, so you wouldn't even have the hint of the relationship lines to give you an idea of what the model's about. So let's go back over to Safyr, and I'm just going to show you a couple more features. So one of the things is we could subset the model now, rather than looking at the 4,000 tables or whatever it was. We can just choose the subject area, and we can just see the set of tables that we included in our subset. And then what we can also do, if we take any of the tables, I can use this option, find the table in the J.D. Edwards hierarchy. And this opens up now an alternative way of looking at the set of tables. What this does, this groups the tables by module. And again, this is something which is inherent, is inherent to the J.D. Edwards metadata. It's something we pull when we do the extract. When we do the other packages like SAP and PeopleSoft, there's something similar in those. We do the same kind of feature. So you can see that the sales order header file belongs to the sales management area of J.D. Edwards. And there's a whole bunch of other tables here now. There's the sales order detail file we looked at. There's the invoice print file, a whole bunch of other tables which, if we were sort of really focusing on sales orders, would warrant further investigation. And if I close this down, you can see some of the other areas here. There's payroll, and there are some country-specific areas, obviously a Japanese, something to do with Japan there. So another approach is that you could say, I'll start with this hierarchy, and I'll pick something like fixed assets, and I'll then look at which tables belong to that particular that module. And here, for instance, here's equipment messages, whatever that might be. If I double click on that, I'm into that same view of the metadata. So when I come to do an export, like we did into the ERw model, I could export the metadata that I've put into a subject area. I could do that into other formats. I could generate an XML file from it, for instance. I could create a CSV file of the, and that will give you a text, but in both cases, a text-based representation of the set of objects that we've seen in the model. And you can also see there is another option here, which we call a comparison file. So you can take the metadata from a set of tables and relationships and attributes, and you can make what we call a comparison file. And if you do that from two different systems, as the name implies, you can compare the differences. So you could take all the tables, attributes, and relationships from two entire instances. You could take two PeopleSoft systems, for instance, maybe different versions or different regional implementations or development and production versions, and then you can do a compare so that you can identify the differences between them. And it is even practical to do that for two entire SAP systems. So just to give you an idea of what that's like, I've already pre-built a couple of comparison files from different versions of JD Edwards, a version 9 and a version 9.1, the sales area, that sales hierarchy level that I showed you just a moment ago. And then what we can do is we can decide what granularity of compare we want to do. And you choose the relevant checkboxes here of how detailed a comparison you want to do. For example, you can say, do you want to show where there are things like primary key differences or data typing differences? And then based upon that, it will perform a comparison of the results. And as you can see here then, on the left you've got the common name of the object, and then you've got two columns to show you the two systems being compared. So we have a table here, and one of the attributes, this attribute here on that first table, the descriptive name, the label on the first system is address book amount, on the second system it's address book amount 1. And that's one of the sorts of comparisons I could turn off if I wanted to. If that wasn't important, I could turn off that kind of comparison. On that same table there's an attribute which exists on the second system. It doesn't exist at all on the first system. So, you know, we're comparing a 9 and a 9.1 version of JD Edwards, and as you'd expect, they've made changes to these tables, or added some attributes in this case. Same sort of thing for the other attributes, so for the other tables. And then at the end here, there's a whole bunch of tables, these ones here, which only exist in the second system. Again, it's probably some tables that they've added to represent new functionality in the sales area of JD Edwards. So there's 6 or 7 tables there which exist only in the 9.1 version of JD Edwards and not in version 9. Again, this kind of comparison, you can do that for any of the system types that we support. So I'm just going to switch into perhaps another system just to give you a feeling for, let's look for instance a PeopleSoft system. Here's a PeopleSoft CRM system. The PeopleSoft table names are not quite as unfriendly as the JD Edwards ones are, but the way you explore this, the interface, the creation of subject areas, the exporting into ERw, the comparison files, the hierarchy, if I want to know which module this table lives in, this is in return items or something, exactly the same kind of capabilities. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show you. I hope it makes sense. Just really to kind of summarize, it's a lot of the functionalities I hope I've been able to show you is about this scoping. Part of the problem is you want to be able to get at the meaningful metadata in a package like JD Edwards or PeopleSoft or SAP that's only part of the problem. The other part of the problem is bringing that amount of metadata down into more manageable groupings, and that's really, I think, where Safyr's real value comes in, is in helping you to quickly arrive at relevant subsets, things that are relevant to your project. So thanks very much for your time. I'm going to pass back to John now to wrap up.
Right. Thanks very much, Nick. Much appreciated. Just a couple of points. Currently, I have everybody on mute, but what I'd like to do, and if that's something that Nick is all right with, we can unmute to answer any questions that anybody may have. At this point, I'm not showing any questions, but I thought I'd unmute just to make sure that people are not holding themselves back because they don't want to type in. They just want to have a conversation. So if we can go ahead and do that.
Sure. Yeah.
So let me do that. Let me take everybody off of mute. Hi, everybody. This is John Keegan again with Sandhill. I've unmuted everybody, and I just wanted to find out, does anybody have any questions at this point regarding what Nick has brought up? So I'm not hearing any responses at this point. Does anybody have any questions?
I think we'll take that as a no, John.
I'll take that as a no. Right. Well, everybody, one thing that I would like to say, and I set this as kind of a preamble as we began the WebEx, or the webinar, you're only going to be as successful in these tools, ERw and Safyr, if you have the proper training and understanding. And this is where Sandhill comes in. Next slide, please. We offer training that is both within product. As I mentioned, we do assessments that touch on the processes, whether it's your DMM, your data model management, maturity, anything regarding people, places, and things, so product, process, and people. Next, please. And again, going back to the veracity of the data, what standards and best practices do you have in place? And with Sandhill, we have our own set of standards and best practices. And again, that's done through an assessment on our part to better understand kind of where you are and score. And it is a solution that is customized to your needs. Next, please. And again, this is kind of the overall. So taking a look at how Sandhill can help both from product, processes, and people. That is our products, our processes of getting you up and running, and our services utilizing our consultants through our training, standards, and best practices. It's going to give you a better understanding and a better, clear end result for your business glossaries and your enterprise repositories, so that what comes out of that from a data standpoint is actually the truth and nothing but the truth. Next. So up in front of you is what I refer to as it's a call to action. So if there are any questions, my email is there. Please feel free to send myself any kind of questions that you may have, anything you'd like to have kind of a follow-on discussion about, either regarding Safyr and education, or ERw and education, any way that we may be able to make you more successful as to what you're doing. If you can do me a favor, I'm going to be posting out this WebEx, and I want to make sure that everybody does have an opportunity to take a look at that. We'd appreciate any kind of feedback that you have on the presentation today, as it just makes it makes us better at what we're trying to do in terms of messaging. So at this point, what I'd like to do is just say much thanks to Nick Porter of Silhouette Technology, and again, thank you for your time today.